Welcome to another video. Today we're out here going for a walk, and today I want to talk about HDZero versus DJI. I don't want this to be a controversial video, but I'm just assuming that people are going to be concerned about my testing methodology, concerned about the fairness of the test, etc. But I wanted to see if I put HDZero next to DJI in the same location with the goggles, how I have them set up, with two very similar quads. My grinderinos, the HDZero one using a true RC antenna, mounted relatively well, and the DJI using a standard O3 antenna sticking straight out the back. Not the ideal position, but hey, it works. As for the goggles, the DJI Goggles 2, pretty much stock across the board. I changed the head strap, but that shouldn't make a difference. In the HDZero case, I'm using true RCs all around, patches on the front, and Omnis on the top. Down at our local spot, I went for a little fly around the office park into different locations to see what the breakup looked like. This is really just a test for me, as well as anybody else who's curious, flying around in the area that we all fly around as FPV pilots in office park. I really wanted to see what I can expect, where I could fly with one system versus where I could fly with another. Before going into this, I was pretty sure that the DJI was going to have better penetration, but we'll see what the results look like. For this test, I'm going to start out with the DJI goggles in 40 megabits per second mode, basically the highest bandwidth and power rating that you can set on the Goggles 2. Then I'm going to switch it over and we're going to do it at 20 hertz. Yes, I said 20 megabits per second or 40 megabits per second mode, but it's 40 hertz. The next flight I'm going to do is 20 hertz just to see what difference that makes. And then I'm going to switch over to the HDZero running at max. It's a Freestyle VTX2 and it is running full out R1, all that jazz. So let's get up in the air and see how she do.
I realized while I was watching this back, I really didn't talk all that much during these flights because I was very focused, but here we're starting off 40 hertz mode. I'm going to talk a lot about megabits per second because that's really where I'm going to see the signal degradation in the goggle DVR. I'm going to go up here and dive this. Definitely feeling anxious on this first dive because the first time I tried this, I got stuck in this little tree at the bottom there. It doesn't look too big, but it is 10 feet tall and the branches are vertical, so it catches all drones and keeps them there. Now we're on the back of the building, and here you're going to start to see the first real signal degradation down to 22-ish megabits per second. Nothing really too crazy. I did let go of the building. I kind of popped out from the side of it pretty early, so I really never saw that signal crater, especially down at the bottom of the building where there's more ground in between me and the quad, and we'll see that possibly in the next flight. But overall, it did fantastic. Here again, the signal's pretty much locked at 50 megabits per second. No real issues here. I'm going to slow down because this is a crossroad up here. And I got to make sure I don't hit anything as I go across. You can see me there on the right. So now we're completely beside us. Now we're behind the position we're sitting. And I did maintain the same sitting position throughout all of these tests. So it is pretty indicative of what you'd experience in between the different systems. So here, again, there's a Wi-Fi access point at the corner of the building right by where that flag is. And I'm seeing the signal drop immensely. So here there's a ton of concrete between us and the drone, as well as that Wi-Fi access point causing a ton of interference, and you're seeing it crater down to like 10 and below megabits per second. So it's definitely hard to fly. You're seeing a ton of breakup in that smeary, messy DJI digital breakup, as well as drop frames. So it's not really smooth and not really something you could comfortably fly through, but it's something you can at least fly out of. So here we're just changing up to that second level to put a little bit more concrete between me and the drone. Again, you're seeing it drop down to like 24 or 14, somewhere in there. A little chunky frame rate, a little blurry as far as the video itself goes, but honestly still very flyable. All the way through there, the penetration and range are as good as it could be. And so here I'm going to try something I've never done at this location, which is fly entirely around one of these buildings. And while the frame rate does, or not the frame rate, the megabits per second does drop down to 8 and 9, it's still completely fine. And as soon as I punch out the back side of this building, so where I've got direct line of sight once again to the drone, it recovers right back to 50 megabits per second. And we are home free. It was extremely impressive what it managed to pull off, and I'm pretty surprised at what I managed to do.
Okay, so let's go down to transmission. We're gonna go down here. We're gonna go to 20 hertz. We're gonna set it back to channel 1 once again. Okay. Well, I did not expect that. I did not expect to fly around a building today. But with all that said, let's get into the second flight. This is gonna be the 20 hertz mode on the goggles 2 to see if it makes a difference. We'll see what it looks like.
Now we got the drone switched down to that 20 hertz mode in the DJI goggles 2. And as you're going to see throughout this flight, I think what it's doing is actually just limiting that bit rate. I don't know if it's actually changing the RF power. So you'll see it's locked at 25 megabits per second. Here on that first flight, we were locked at 50. And as soon as we go around the back, and this time I do get a cleaner dive, so I hug the building a little bit better, and I do see a little bit more drop in frame rate, but it pretty much stops at 25 until I get to the bottom here. And then it jumps down to 14, still very flyable. But on the previous flight, it was fluctuating quite a bit there between that like kind of 25 and 50 megabits per second, which is why I think what it's doing in this mode is just limiting it down to 25 megabits per second. And here we're cruising through, locked at 25 pretty much the whole way, and we do have visual line of sight to the quad. Occasionally some concrete in between us, but really nothing to worry too much about. And we're just going to cruise down here back behind the position I'm sitting in. And right here is where you started to see the 40 hertz mode start to drop down in that megabits per second number. And it's not until about here you see it drop on the 20 hertz mode. And again, I think it's just because you'll see the megabits per second number is very similar to that first run. I think it's just putting a cap on that peak megabits per second bandwidth. Here we're doing that same cruise along the bottom, and as I get closer and closer to being directly beside myself, that frame rate or megabits per second mode, that megabits per second slowly recovers. I'm going to swap back up to that top floor again. And again, nothing really to write home about. It works as I expected it to, because I've flown this section of the parking garage quite a bit, and usually I'm fine. Occasionally I'll lose a frame here or there, but it's nothing too crazy and nothing I can't fly through. So as we pop out, you'll see it jumps back to that locked 25 megabits per second until we start to go around the outside of this building, and then you'll see it drop right down. And I think that's the lowest I ever saw, was it dropped to 5 megabits per second. But again, still managed to fly through, still got around the corner of the building. And as soon as I got to this backside and back into line of sight, rocked right back up to 25 megabits per second, and it locked in there. Honestly, I was pretty shocked by this flight in particular, because I expected the 20 hertz mode to be lower in range and penetration, but it just wasn't.
There we go. Let's get the HDZero out and let's try that again. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, that doesn't look a whole lot different to me. That looks nearly identical. So with that said, let's break out the HDZero quad and goggles and let's get into it.
Here we go with HDZero. We are in the 90 540p mode, so 90 frames per second, 540p. This feels super sharp, especially after flying DJI. We're right out of the corner of the patch antenna, so we're starting to see a little breakup over here because we got some distance, some trees, some building between us, and as soon as I disappear behind the building, I instantly lose most of the signal. I have enough where I can get out from behind the building because the breakup isn't quite as bad in the goggles, I think. But yeah, the DJI managed to fly back there, and here the HDZero definitely lost it. Here we're seeing a little bit of breakup, nothing you can't fly through. Honestly, this was, if you've never flown HDZero before, this is probably pretty distracting. But once you've flown HDZero for a little bit, nothing too bad there. Easy to fly through, cruising right past myself. So now I'm officially off those patch antennas because I'm basically behind myself, and you're going to see the signal start to drop pretty quick in comparison to the DJI. I think this is because the DJI is basically rocking 4 Omni antennas, where I'm rocking 2 Omnis and 2 patches. I might try this again with 4 Omnis total on the goggles and see if I do get better signal back here. But as you can see, like with the DJI goggles, the signal's pretty awful. And I decided not to try to drop down and fly through that bottom section because I was going to lose video pretty much completely, and I didn't want to have to walk and get my quad. So I fly back a little higher just so I get decent signal, and I come down here in the back corner. And again, not too bad breakup-wise, definitely flyable, and nothing too crazy. So the penetration is pretty comparable, I would say, to DJI at this current moment, until we go to the building. And this is where I think DJI really takes the cake, because there it goes. Video's gone. Fortunately, because HDZero is more like analog, I basically did the whole when in doubt, throttle out, and got video back instantly as soon as I cleared the building, and I could fly back to myself. I think that right there is a pretty clear showcase of the difference and the level of penetration that you get with DJI versus something like HDZero or analog. You definitely could run a bigger antenna on the quad. You could definitely run more Omni antennas, or I could face the patch antennas more towards the building and probably get close to what the DJI system did. But with the current system I have right now, that's just a limitation I'm naturally going to face.
And that was HDZero. I'm not going to say I expected more, because it is a really challenging environment in this office park. There's a lot of Wi-Fi, a lot of concrete, a lot of buildings. It's a pretty challenging environment for even the best system. But in comparison to DJI, I mean, I don't think it's really a contest. I don't think it was even a contest before we started this, but I am surprised I wasn't able to get as far around that first building to do that second dive. And I was surprised I lost it the instant I went around the corner of that building at the end. All in all, I think the results are interesting. I'm still gonna keep flying HDZero because I love that latency, but I am thinking about raising the antenna up on that Grinderino to see if I can get a little better performance. Also, I'm curious if switching to Omnis on the front might also increase performance, but that's gonna be for another test and another day. As always, links to what I use to make these videos is down there in the description below. They are Amazon affiliate links. They help me do all the shenanigans that I do here on this channel. As always, thank you for joining me in this video. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.
It is a little bonus for those who've stuck around after the credits. After I finished that lap with HDZero, I went in and nailed a little gap inside the parking garage that's right next to us that I really haven't been as comfortable with hitting on DJI, just because it's super tight, technical, and the latency on the DJI system does spike when you get to the bottom of the stair dive. But with HDZero, it feels fantastic. It took me like 2 tries, and I did definitely bump the wall on the way down, but this is why HDZero I think is really, really good for tight and technical freestyle, because it kind of lets your reaction time show a little bit more, where DJI, you kind of are not only flying your reaction time, but you're also flying the latency of the system. So you have to kind of account for that, and also you're at the mercy of that variable latency. But again, at the end of the day, one system is not better than the other in its entirety. It's really just 2 different ways to handle video for FPV quads. And so if latency is very important to you and you're very sensitive, or you're coming from analog and you want that same feel in a digital system, HDZero is pretty much your go-to. If you want the ultimate in visual fidelity and the highest penetration out of the gate, and penetration range are more or less the same thing. Obviously, antenna choice can make a huge difference there, but DJI really does take the cake in both of those categories.